Can we give it a round of applause? Okay, thanks everybody. So when I was looking at the agenda for the talks that were scheduled for today, most of them were really focused on a number of technical items, some really interesting talks this morning, some more this afternoon. I also thought most of us here are leaders in our various organizations. These could be small startups, small teams, some of us lead large teams. And all along that journey, I thought it might just be helpful to share some of the things I've learned along the way, a lot of the things I've screwed up, and try to give this talk here in just about 20 minutes and see how it goes. So I thought if we're going to talk about leading at scale, we should start with the definition of leadership. So what's interesting to me about this definition is that it's a set of characteristics that make a good leader, or it's the position or fact of being the leader. It turns out you do not need one to have the other, right? You can definitely be put into a position where you don't necessarily have the skill set, where you haven't learned, where you haven't made mistakes. And I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that I've found along the way here. So first, if you kind of think back to what was the first time you had one of those big jobs, and whether this is you're a founder and you start and you're the first employee and you're writing all the code, and then at some point you realize, I'm not as close to the code anymore, my team continues to grow, I don't know every line of this product, people are depending on me for their livelihood, for their career development, for their growth, or you get a promotion, you get a job at a different company, but somewhere you have that moment where you realize, this is something new for me. This is big. I feel like I'm really taking a step forward in my career. So I kind of always think about what that's like on the first day that you get to work. And I feel like you're kind of like this, right? You're kind of smiley, you're excited, you're like, all right, this is going to be great. And then you get there and you start learning, you start meeting people, you start asking questions, and then somewhere along the ways, maybe it's 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, holy shit. Like, what have I gotten myself into? And, I think everybody in every one of these jobs goes through this realization. Some people go through it on an absolute daily basis. But it's really this revelation. Yes, the laughs are just consent. You go through this and you realize there's just so much that we don't know, and so much that we can't fix, and so many things that we wish we had more time in the day for. And these jobs are really, really challenging. They're really hard because they're not predictable. We are not making widgets. We are not running a factory line. There's lots of complexity, lots of ingenuity, lots of new problems that crop up on a daily basis. And unfortunately, the software is actually the easy part relative to the people who are completely unpredictable at scale. So, I kind of think about leadership, especially when you're earlier in your career. It's kind of like this. You're trying to take a shot, totally blindfolded, don't really quite know what you're doing. By the way, for anybody who's interested, this is actually Prince William, and apparently shooting a bow and arrow with a blindfold on is actually a thing. I don't quite understand it, but it's actually somehow a sport. But anyway, so you're taking this shot, and you're going, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but you're kind of hoping that it kind of looks like this. You know you're not going to hit the bullseye, but you're going to be close, right? You hope you're going to be close. I think the reality for most of us, myself for sure, looks more like this, right? At least it was kind of in the direction of the target, and I actually feel pretty good about that, but nowhere close to what's going on. And then, you start talking to the folks on your team, and they start walking around like this, right? So, like, all of us are going through the same thing in whatever role, whatever size team, whatever company. Your team's in one spot, it's in 10 spots. It doesn't matter. We all go through this, and I think the reality is we all kind of stumble through this as we're going, and we're just really hoping that we're doing more right than wrong. And over time, hopefully that level of right increases, or you find something that works, and then you just keep doing that same thing that works. So I have this saying that I use with my team quite a lot, which is that experience really is just a brute force exercise, right? The same way if we were trying to write code and, I don't know what it's going to be, or if you remember trying to write a password cracker when you were like 10 years old or 15 or whatever, and you just go, we'll just do a loop of every character possible. That'll totally work. And in 237 years, you crack a password. So like this experience, especially at a leadership level, and these types of roles that we have and the ways our teams depend on us, it's really just a matter of trying lots and lots of things, trying to learn from others who have also tried lots and lots of things, and figuring out what works, and not even what works forever, but what works now. Because what works now is not going to be what works in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years. Your team is going to grow, your role is going to change, your team's going to be more sophisticated, you will be more sophisticated. And so it's just a matter of this continual experimentation process and continual learning. So I've done just a couple of these different leadership talks in the past, and usually I have like a 60 to 90-minute version of here's all the things I fucked up along the way. And it's a very, very long list. So I tried to figure out, well, how do we compress this into 20 minutes and maybe share a couple tips I thought were interesting. So I chose to pick a couple of topics here. Talk about communication, autonomy, speed, trust, and recruiting. Right? So I tried to kind of run the gamut here. But I want to start with recruiting. So everybody I know in technology leadership knows the first part of this quote. Hiring is the most important thing you do. It's Eric Schmidt. He said it a bunch of times, a bunch of conferences, talks. It's in how Google works. It's repeated in work rules. Very, very famous quote. Most people don't know the second sentence that comes right after that. And I think actually the reality is most people do what the second sentence says. Right? Oh, recruiting's totally important. It's super, super important. I got to hire. I got to grow. I better hire a recruiting team. And I think one of the things to think about is, as leaders, our job is to be recruiters. Now, when we think about hiring altogether, recruiting as an act is only part of that process, right? So, one, I just want to kind of get you thinking about this. Think about what amount of your time do you spend on recruiting, right? You spend an hour a day. It's 40-hour week. It's 12.5%. Spend 2 hours a day. It's 25% of your time. 2 hours every day, it's 10 hours a week. 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. When you start looking at all the things you do around hiring, this is looking at LinkedIn, this is talking to candidates, screening CVs, working on job descriptions, doing informationals, having coffee with people, having people who aren't sure about your company and you're convincing them to just put in the time to interview, or people who are holding an offer, but they've also got an offer from Facebook and Google and Amazon and whomever, and you're trying to convince them to come join your merry band. Just as a reference point, I think part of this percentage of your time does scale as your team scales. But for those of us who have organizations that are a little bit larger, and I check larger at somewhere around, you can't know every bit of the product. Right? Now, that's not a very deterministic line, but if you just kind of get a sense of that, when you no longer know every nook and cranny of the product, I would assert that this is the single biggest way to get leverage and to help scale your team. I know for me, I spend somewhere between about a third and half my time on something around hiring. I will also say, I think good hiring is status quo in the world today. We can't run technology companies without looking at hiring, and I think the reality is most people do it kind of okay. I also think there's a very, very small number of organizations that do it great. And great hiring truly is a competitive advantage. Enables you to get the best people. Best people we all know, it's not a 1.2x return, it's a 5x, it's a 10x return. Great people build things that good people could never get to. It's not a time savings, it's that you can build things that would not otherwise exist. Right? It allows you to grow faster, because when you hire great people, they attract other great people. So you meet a great engineer, they come through and they interview. Not only are you evaluating them, they're evaluating, hey, are the guys interviewing me, are they smarter than me? Can I learn from them? Or am I feeling like I'm going to come be the big fish in this pond? Right? So as you start thinking about that recruiting muscle, and as you start thinking about building a great team, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? The first couple people on your team, the first couple people on a group, the first couple people on a site, they start to set the tone of what is that bar? What do you value? What is the minimum that you'd accept? What are you looking for? So I think about our job as technology leaders. And I think from a recruiting standpoint, it comes down to three things. One, we should be the first and foremost number one recruiter for our teams. Right? This is 100% a lead by example thing. Right? I always say your team will emulate the worst behavior that you role model. The worst, not the best, the worst. And so when it comes to recruiting, you have to emulate where you want everyone to be. You want to turn your entire team into recruiters, because for everybody here who gets 1,000 LinkedIn messages a week from random recruiters about some random job, right? And we all just hit delete, delete, delete. and the one that comes from another engineer at another company, you actually read that one. You might even reply to that guy, right? You might talk to that person. You might go meet him for coffee. You might go meet for a beer. You might just meet at a meetup. You might not actually go work with them now. But over time, that builds a different type of network. And when you start to be the lead recruiter for your team, it brings your team with you, and they become recruiters. They become evangelists of what you guys are doing. And it just becomes a self-fulfilling machine that's just fantastic. The other piece here that I think is really important for us as leaders is to continually raise the bar. Just like with our techniques about how we lead, the things that used to work 6 or 12 months ago are not necessarily the same things that work today. The place of what we thought was a great developer 6 or 12 months ago, technology continues to move, systems become more sophisticated, our product continues to grow, hopefully. We need bigger scale, we have more sophistication, there's more technology out there. We need to continually raise the bar, and that starts with everybody in this room. Another thing I want to talk about is trust. Right? I find trust is really, really critical as a leader, because at some point you're not going to know what everybody on your team is doing, and you can't physically check it. You don't have the possible time to do so. So I'll go back to one of these definitions. Trust, to believe that someone is good and honest and will not harm you, or that something is safe and reliable. And probably just another thing to think about is, do you trust your team? I mean, like, really, really trust your team. Right? Would you let them ship a product you haven't seen? Would you let them demo to your board if you're not there? Would you let them go visit a customer and demo something new or make a commitment even if you're not going to be there? And as we think about scale, as we think about growing our teams, these are the types of things that we have to be comfortable with. Right? This is the only way that we enable our teams and empower them. So I have these 3 very simple questions that I always ask people. Right? Are people on your team smart, capable, and rational? And then I always tell them, if you have people who aren't smart, probably not the right job for them. If you have people who aren't capable, probably not the right job for them. And if you have people who aren't rational, we're all screwed. Right? Like, you almost have to believe that everybody on your team is smart, capable, and rational all at the same time. Now, why does this matter? When you have people who are smart, capable, and rational, you have to believe that they're going to make the right decision given the right information. You have to believe that, right? Think about all those times that somebody makes a decision, they go blue instead of red, and you get frustrated. Oh, how did you go blue? Clearly, it's got to be red. And every time that happens, if you just take a second and think about, why is it supposed to go red? Oh, well, you know that blue causes this problem, and it doesn't work for colorblind people, and it doesn't work in this country, and blah, blah, blah. And you realize you've actually never told anybody that. You know that because you were in some other discussion or some other meeting, or you met with a customer, but you haven't shared that information. So how would they know? They did the best that they could with the information they have. And so I think that notion of being able to trust your team really also changes our roles, because it's no longer about inspecting or supervising or telling your team what to do. It's a little bit different. It's helping and empowering your team to make decisions and agreeing on the rules that they're going to do that. It's about principles. It's about sharing context and then just getting out of their way. Right? All of us, we spend a lot of time interviewing. We spend a lot of time making sure that we're hiring really great people. And there's a jobs quote that I definitely will not get right. But it's something along the lines of, the worst thing you can do is hire great people and then tell them what to do. Right? So this is how we have these agreements, and we let people do what they're best at. Communication's another big one. So if our job is to set principles and share context, communication is the way that we do this. It is the core of what we do as leaders to help ensure our teams are on the same page, to help ensure they have the same information, to ensure that they know what's important, to make sure that they're contributing, that they're sharing back, that they're giving us feedback, that we're coaching them to be better, they're coaching us to be better, is at the core of what we do in any type of leadership position. So I thought, in point of principles, I thought I'd share my principles about communications. One, always start with why. For anybody who hasn't seen the TED Talk on Start With Why, I think it's like the second most watched TED Talk ever. So I'm assuming everybody in this room has seen it, or not, it's very findable. There's also a good book, it's Simon Sinek. Second, so I have over time, and I don't know if anybody here has ever previously worked for Amazon. I know Ralph's going to talk later. But I worked for AWS for a point in time, and they beat the PowerPoint out of me, and I am that much better for it. It takes a long time to accept that PowerPoint is a really, really shitty tool to communicate. But what I've gotten into my head, and now what makes sense, is A PowerPoint sucks as a communication device if you're not the one there to tell the story. When you build that slide deck, in your head, you're crafting a story. There's a narrative along this. Like, you look at these slides. There's 1,000 more words that go along with it than what you write on the slides. And it just doesn't work. But writing, actually writing down sentences and paragraphs and words and documents is completely durable. It enables you to lead when you're not in the room. And this becomes an incredibly important technique to scale, especially when you start thinking about teams in multiple locations, especially when you start thinking about multiple product streams, when you start thinking about the fact that you can't even really keep up with your whole team on a daily basis when your team gets to 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100, 500. You need a durable medium to really communicate. And the third is transparent by default. I think this goes back to that sharing context is if your team is smart, capable, or rational, well, you should trust them. Or you trust them to make the right decision. But the right decision is not just what's the right product decision or what's the right engineering decision. It's also what's the right information to share, what's appropriate to share, what's not appropriate to share, what's truly confidential. And how do you trust them and give them that information? Because your job is to make sure your team has the same level of information that you do. Excuse me. Autonomy. So for those of you who saw Eric's talk yesterday, just really warmed my heart. I am a huge Dan Pink fan. Mastery, Autonomy, Purpose. If anybody hasn't read Drive, I strongly endorse it. So I will not do anything close to what Eric did to demonstrate what Drive can do and how you can think about a way to lead your team. But I thought autonomy was just a really quick one to focus on. And if you look at those definitions, especially the second there, the ability to make your own decisions without being controlled by anyone else. Right? And this goes back to, do you trust your team? Right? And so, when I think about having really autonomous teams, these are the things that really let you scale. Right? When your teams can actually operate themselves and they know what their goal is, they know what they're focused on, and they know where they're working. So, again, I have a kind of a couple definitions for what an autonomous team, and this is almost like the Joel test for, is this a good place to go work? But autonomous teams should set their own backlog, ship whenever they want, they don't need approvals, and they don't have dependencies. Now, that doesn't mean they don't consume other services from other teams. It doesn't mean that they don't communicate with other people. It doesn't mean that multiple teams have to work together to ship a great experience for a user. But it's the notion that teams are truly decoupled, that we're agreed on the goal, and then they're working in the best way they know how to achieve that goal. They are going to be the ones in the details. They're going to have way more context about hitting that particular goal than anyone else in the business. Why wouldn't you let them be in charge of making those decisions? And the last one, speed. Surprisingly, by the way, this movie is old enough that it's actually almost impossible to find a high-res version of this. So on the monitors, this might be super pixelated in the back. I'm not sure. I had to actually do that stretching thing that I hate to do to images. But there's this thing. How many people have heard of Boyd's Law of Iteration? A few? I see like a very small number of head nods. I strongly recommend Googling this. This dude's fascinating. Guy in the Air Force, 1940s, 1950s, during World War II. The newer planes kept getting beat by the older planes, and it was about U.S. planes versus MiGs and all this, and all these types of dogfights. Hundreds of pages, lots of books. Really fascinating guy. But he made this assertion as he discovered what the problem was between the old plane and the new plane, why the old plane kept winning, which is it was about half a second faster to change maneuvers. And he came up with this assertion that it's not the quality of an iteration. It's not about being perfect. It's about how quickly can you correct when you get new information. So speed of iteration trumps the quality of iteration. And I'll close on this when we talk about speed. Mark Andreessen, kind of a smart guy. Prolific on Twitter, which trying to find this, if anybody wants it, just email me and I'll send you the link because he has like 40,000 tweets, so you'll never find this one again. But he did this, and this is about 2 years old or something like this, but I really love the start of this, which is cycle time compression may be the most underestimated force in determining winners and losers in tech. Right? Again, it goes back to speed of iteration. How quickly can you learn something and change what you're doing? I heard Christian speaking yesterday morning to kind of welcome us all, and I didn't have context of how fast an idea to live business, I think he said 3 months, which blows me away. I have 1,000 questions on how to do that, and I just want to learn, because that ability to go from idea to execution and actually offer something in such a short period of time. Now, speed is all relative depending on what you're doing. You're building a whole new business, 3 months is crazy fast, right? You're adding a new feature, How do you set your teams up to deploy thousands of times a day, tens of thousands of times a day? How do you have anybody on your team have an idea about a feature and come back from lunch and go from an idea to production in an afternoon? These speed numbers are relative, but I think as leaders, our job is to continually focus on these and continually push our teams to move faster and faster and be able to do this. So with that, I'll try to close out on these topics in any of the breaks or Q&A. I'm happy to actually talk about any of this stuff. I promise I have made thousands of mistakes, and so when I think of that brute force exercise, I've just started punching a lot of holes and figuring out what doesn't work. But I find this stuff fascinating. I don't think there's any right answers, and I always love to share tips. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions in the audience? Please. Come on, there's so much to ask about this. Okay, I have a question on autonomy. I think what you're saying on the autonomy slide is all right, but it leaves out the hard part. So how do you, what are the things you actually, what are the boundaries you set to your teams to make this possible?
Yeah, so that is the hard part. And the way I've kind of always simplified this in my head is that any team, no matter the scope, is this the one team of 7 folks as a scrum team, is it the group of teams working on a product area or on a whole product stream or whatever, is that it comes down to an agreement on the goal, on the destination that they're trying to reach. Right? And that's almost time horizon independent. It could be a goal that's a week away or a month away, a year away, doesn't matter. Now, getting agreement and alignment on goals, super, super hard. Right? You heard the term OKRs come up a couple times yesterday. The speaker from LinkedIn, sorry, I forgot your name, just mentioned it really briefly this morning. There's lots and lots of tools out there to drive alignment, but I think that of a large complex system of independent decisions and people, super hard. And we've actually just gone through it at Skyscanner. I got a lot of lessons of things that we screwed up. I don't know that we have a really great solution for that part. But I think once you get to those goals, it becomes much, much easier.
Please, otherwise I have my next question. So can you give a bit of, after that, insight in this goal setting, like just from practice from Skyscanner, how do you structure your goals? Is it OKRs? What are your learnings with OKRs? Because I think many of us are starting to use OKRs, and there are many things you can do right and wrong there.
Yeah, so we've been on the OKR journey for about 2 years or so, I think. And we've actually started to move away from a portion of the OKRs. So if you think of the OKRs as saying, what is the objective I'm trying to achieve? And what are the ways I'm going to measure myself? And I think the trap we fell into is the natural human trap, which is no matter what anyone says about, Eric made this comment yesterday, don't use OKRs as a way to measure people's performance. However, in reality, if those are the things you're supposed to be working on, and your performance is based upon how well you do the things you're supposed to be working on, they naturally become those measuring sticks. Whether you intend that or not, they just naturally do. That's just human nature. And so one of the things that we found is that people would set key results and move conversion rate by +2 absolute points or something. And what they'd find is along the way they'd be iterating on this and experimenting, and it turns out they have the totally wrong page, right? Because it'd be increased conversion rate on the buy premium service page or something. Makes no sense. Turns out that's totally the wrong thing. They should completely change their goal. But they were so fixated on this going, what's going to happen in my performance review? What's going to happen from a career perspective? Our whole team's going to fail. And so we found people got really, really locked into the objective metrics and the key results part, which is what you want, but at the same time creates this negative thing. So we've just gone through this first iteration, and like I said, screwed up a bunch of things. But what we tried to focus on from our goals is the same way you would think about alignment at the objective level. Same type of cascade, what's important for the company, how does that break down between teams, how are they doing things that are accretive. The same things about when you look at the key results, you typically have 2 parts to a key result. One, what is the metric you're going to measure? Second, what is the target value that you expect that metric to achieve? And kept the objective alignment, kept the metric to track progress, dropped the finish line piece. And just that simple change, and then the second part that we did is we've pushed our teams to say, you guys know your goal best. You can redefine your goal at any point in time, and then we just have very kind of long, drawn-out horizons for forced cadence at like company strategy level and things like this. So we'll see how it goes, but at least felt better.
Just to understand, basically, you will say increase conversion rate, but you don't say by how much.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yes. So thank you for the talk, first of all. It was very interesting. And my experience is, I have a very, very similar kind of conclusions. I have a question. So since you enable and you try to push down recruitment to the developers or to the teams, one of the key objectives that I think, for example, in our case, we are trying to achieve is to achieve a lot of, to break monoculture. So try to have diverse teams that can provide different, because in problem solving, the more different ways of thinking that you have, the more you can get solutions that work. How do you avoid the fact that people will tend to hire people that are similar to them, and and how do you enforce them or spread this culture across the teams?
Yeah, so I think there's two different parts there, and one, there's no way to deal with removing bias and monoculture from tech in 3 minutes, but I'll try. So I think the first part is when I talk about recruiting, to me recruiting is a portion of the hiring process, but is not the exclusive part of the hiring process. And what we really try to focus our teams on is how do we get everybody excited about getting the people they know, the people they meet, excited about the company, excited about the projects that we're working on. And so we look a lot at using our overall engineering team as a sourcing team, right? And they're always going to outrank the number of people that we have in the talent team. They're always going to get better response rates on LinkedIn pings. They're always going to be more credible when they describe this stuff. So we think a lot about that portion. Second is once you have a candidate in the process, how do you know that they're qualified? And how do you engineer bias out of the system as best you can? How do you try to diversify from gender, from ethnicity, from thinking process, from background, all these types of things? There's lots and lots of stuff out there around unconscious bias training. The two best, for anybody who hasn't watched them, I recommend all the videos from Google and Facebook. It'll cost you like 4 hours, 5 hours, and it will open your eyes to how screwed up a bunch of things are. I don't think anybody has this solved well, by the way, but I think awareness is an important step. And then there's lots and lots of material about what you can do on the interviewing process to help make things more fair for people that don't necessarily come from that same monoculture background.
One more question, maybe? Anyone? If not, then thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you.